Hello and welcome back to Project 380. In this video, I'm going to get the air ride wired in, plumbed up, and hopefully air in the tank. So with this air ride setup, I've just gone for a basic setup, which means it's manual air ride. So I've got to run some pneumatic pipes up and down the car to some manual valves, which will adjust the ride height. In the future, I might put it on e-management, where it's all controlled by a controller or an app on your phone. But for now, we're just keeping things simple. So the first thing I'm going to do is run 2 lines from the air tank all the way to the dashboard. For this install, I'm going to be using 2 different colours of pneumatic pipe. This is to keep things nice and easy. Red is going to be the supply lines to the paddles, and blue is going from the paddles to the airbags. So the red air line first. If you've watched my previous video where I put the air tank underneath, I put 2 push lock fittings, and that's for good reason. I'm going to run 2 red lines from the tank to the dashboard. I'm going to run 2 rather than 1. Hopefully this will make the air ride raise up a little bit quicker. I've gone ahead and chopped 2 lengths of this pneumatic pipe and taped it together to keep everything nice and neat. In the boot now, I'm going to feed the tube through a little hole I've made with a grommet that comes out underneath the car near the air tank. Now in my previous video you saw I put 1 connection this side and 1 at the other end of the tank. So I'm going to cut this pipe to length and push it into the fitting. When you're cutting this pipe, you want that as straight as possible. So you can buy specific cutters just for this, which cuts it really easily and nice and straight. Now from here, we can work from the back to the front. I'm going to feed the tubing past the fuel lines and through this hole between the fuel tank and the chassis and through into the cab. Now I'm painstakingly going to feed it behind this metal plate, which is going to be a huge pain to remove as I've got the hard top on, and I really should have taken on this job with the hard top off. But I do need this pipe over on the right hand side, so off of camera I'm going to feed it behind this, and that's going to take me ages. Well, that was a massive pain, but I've finally got it over here. I've removed this kick plate and I'm going to run the lines between the carpet and the chassis. There's plenty of space for them there, and up to the dash. Now I'm actually going to be putting my controls here. As I mentioned earlier, I'm using manual controls. This is what's known as a paddle switch. It's a simple up and down with a line in and a line out, and this fits almost perfectly in the surround for those blanks that I've got in the dash. I just had to file that out a little bit to make this fit really snug. On the back, it's a simple in and out, a 2-pipe switch. 1 says supply and 1 says delivery. This is also the exhaust of the system. So when you let the air out of the airbags, the air will come out of this switch. So that red pipe I've just installed will go to the supply side, and from the switch will go to a blue pipe, which will go to the airbags. I'm not going to install the paddles just yet. I'm going to run the rest of the lines first. So the line that goes from the paddle to the back bags, I've ran down the dashboard, back where them red lines were, up the back here. I've then put a T-junction that splits to the left and right bag. That can all be tucked up in here now. And then ran lines through either side of the fuel tank and in the boot there and here. And for the front, I've ran it from the paddles. The right-hand bag is going down the dashboard and through the bulkhead, out the wiring harness grommet there and into the engine bay. The left-hand bag is running underneath the dash, behind the center console, up in this footwell to the bulkhead and through the wiring grommet there and into the engine bay. Now we need to connect those lines to the bags. In the front wheel arches, I've orientated the bags so the input is at the front, and I can run the air line through this grommet here, which is blanked off. That is actually for the ABS wire if you've got an ABS model, but since this hasn't got ABS, I can use that grommet. But this is where we may have a problem. The old style D2 bags had this connection up the top, which would have been ideal. That line would be nice and out of the way of all the wheel and tyre, and would have no chance of hitting on the suspension. But for some reason they've decided to put that input at the bottom of the bag now. So for this reason, I'm going to make this part of the line a serviceable line. So just in case the tyre does rub through this line, I can change just a short amount of line rather than the whole thing all the way back to the paddle. And to do that, I'm going to replace that grommet with a push fit bulkhead fitting. The hole where this grommet is a lot bigger than this bulkhead fitting, so I am going to have to use some big washers. Simply poke that grommet out and put the bulkhead fitting in. Connect it up in the engine bay and tie wrap it right out of the way. Don't do the tie wraps up too tight, you may cut off the circulation to the airbag. So with that bulkhead fitting there, we only need a little bit of line to go between the two fittings. So if this line did ever break, all we've got to do is replace this tiny bit of line. The brass fitting on the bag actually has a nut, so you could take that off, push your line on, make sure it's all the way on, then slide that brass nut back on the pipe, up to the fitting, and you could do it up. These don't need to be too tight. They are brass and they will strip. And then cut the line to the right length and put it in the push fitting. Now I've just got to do the same as I've done here for the other three. I've ran the right hand front bag exactly the same through that grommet, but I've got a slight issue. That charcoal canister is right in the way, so I think that's going to have to go. Done the same with the backs, just ran a bulkhead fitting on both sides and made a little service line. I don't think the backs are going to have anywhere near as much issue as the front, but still I'm happy that I've made this a service line. Now it's time to finally install the paddles. I've added a little bit of line and a few connections, and this here is a sensor, as I'm going to be using a digital pressure gauge, but we'll come to that in a little while. Well, that was a pain to install. Everything gets really tight back there, but I think in this position they look almost OEM. I'm really happy with that. With all the plumbing done, it's time to move on to the electrics. So we need to get power to the compressor. The compressor only has a positive and negative lead, so we need a way to get power to this and control it. But to start off with, this compressor will take a lot of power, so make sure you've got a good battery and a good alternator. My alternator is almost brand new, so I know that's good. And I've installed a slightly bigger 063 battery with a G19 battery tie down. So I know I've got all the power I need to run this compressor. So now we just need a way of joining the compressor to the battery. And we're going to do that with a relay. So as you can see on the relay, I've already got the positive going from the compressor to the relay, and I've made an earth strap to earth the compressor and the relay, and I've made a power wire to go from the battery to the relay. Now you need to make sure this has an inline fuse in it. If you don't put a fuse in it, you can run into issues. But I've made a little fuse box on top of the battery, so that can plug straight into there. And I'm going to run this wire behind this carpet back here along the back side of the boot, and then bolt the relay down with one of these nuts here and earth it to another one. Now I haven't put a fuse in that fuse box yet. That'll come once the whole thing is wired up. Now this relay needs a switched live, so I only want the compressor running when the ignition is on. So I need to find a wire in the car that only comes on with the ignition. So I've taken a live feed from the cigarette lighter, as that comes on when the ignition's on. I'm going to run that through the car now and back into the boot. If we connected this signal wire straight up to that relay, the compressor would run all the time. So we need a way of automatically turning that compressor on and off, and that's where the pressure switch on the tank comes into play. The pressure switch is on the tank. The pressure switch I've chose, I don't know whether this will pick up on camera, but it switches the compressor on at 120 psi and off at 150 psi. The pressure switch has two connections on it. It doesn't matter which way round they go. So I'm going to connect my signal wire to one of them, and the other wire is going to go to that relay. While I'm under here, I'm going to connect that air pressure sensor up. I'll come on to that in a bit. All tucked away there neatly now. The compressor's in, plumbed in, and plugged into the relay, and it's ready to go. Now those sensors, I've got one on the air tank and one on each paddle, and they all lead to a triple air pressure gauge. So we're going to be able to see what's in the tank, what's in the front bags, and what's in the rear bags. It's time to put the key in and see whether everything works. Well, the pressure gauges are on, but the compressor's not. And that's because the last thing you should do is put the fuse in for the compressor. Let's try that again. Well, the compressor's running, and I'm actually surprised how quiet that is. Let's close the boot. That's actually really quiet. Well, it's a little bit louder in the car, but I think with the sound of that new exhaust, that'll drown that right out. It's building pressure up nicely. Hopefully that'll switch off at 150 psi. Well, 155, so close enough. So I let that sit for a while with 150 psi in it, and I had a little leak. These right angle push fittings that I put in the air tank, complete trash. So I changed them, and now I haven't got a leak anymore. So now I'm going to put 100 psi in the front and the back, and check them for leaks. So it's been sitting for about half an hour now, and it hasn't lost a single psi. Time to get them wheels on and drop it to the floor. Just kidding, you're going to have to wait for the next video. That, and I've actually got some maintenance to do on it while it's on axle stands. So like, comment, share and subscribe if you're new, and I'll see you in the next one.